to episode 3 of Girl, How'd You Get That Gig podcast. I'm Celeste Gehring.
Yay, Celeste. And I'm Amy G. Welcome in, everybody. We have such a treat for you today because we have an extremely accomplished guest at a very young age. We'd love to introduce you to Zena Keita. So Zena is currently manager of strategic partnerships at The Athletic. She's also a sideline reporter, hey, in my sisterhood, for the Santa Cruz Warriors. And she's a host for the Golden State Warriors, who we all know and love. She truly is a jack of all trades. Zena Keita, welcome into Girl, How'd You Get That Gig?
Thank you. I'm
Welcome.
so because I feel like I was that person that was always asking, how in the world do people get that job? So I'm so grateful that you guys are doing this and that people can listen and learn. And like we just mentioned, like no gatekeeping. We're going to tell how we got where we are.
No.
Yeah, I love
Share
it.
the wealth, right? Share the knowledge, share the wealth.
For sure.
Exactly. All right, Zena, thanks so much for being here and telling your story. And you have a huge story to tell. It is an amazing one. But let's start currently where you are now at The Athletic. What is your day-to-day like?
Day to day. So at The Athletic, we are a startup. And one of the things that recently happened was the acquisition of The Athletic by the New York Times. And if you've heard about it, it was a major acquisition. Recently, we've shifted to becoming the main sports desk for the New York Times. But one of the things that came along with that is the New York Times has to make a little bit of money back, right? But this thing is we want to elevate our experience. And that includes bringing in brands, bringing in partners. So The Athletic was historically a space that had absolutely no ads, no brands, but we knew that we couldn't grow our content and elevate our product without the input and the influx of support and resources from different brands. So that inserted my department, the commercial team, and then more specifically, the business development team. So I manage relationships and partnerships that inherently change the athletics experience for the reader. So typically when you think of a brand partnership, you think of, some sort of branding on something, right? You'll see a logo, supported by or presented by, et cetera. That's one part of it. My part of the strategic partnership lens is how are we looking at the app and thinking about what a sports fan wants to experience? If they're coming to The Athletic to read about their sports news, they're probably going to want to buy tickets to games, or they're probably going to want to buy their favorite player's jersey, or they're probably going to want to bet on a game. They're not in California, but they're going to want to engage with that sport on multiple levels. So my day-to-day job is not only helping with the strategy of who should we be bringing into our app in our app experience to elevate that sports subscriber, sports fans experience, but what can we be bringing in with those brands that integrates into our app flawlessly, organically, and ultimately makes The Athletic a one-stop shop. So you're not just coming for your sports news, you're also coming for potentially buying tickets. We just did a deal with StubHub, potentially placing a bet. We have a deal with BetMGM, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So day-to-day, working with those clients to find out what do we need from them to integrate into our app, working internally more than anything. I'm essentially a project manager. I'm going to all the different departments at The Athletic to say, what do you need? What do you wish you had? If we bring in this partner, how would you want to work with them? How could that experience for our reader be made better by this partner? Putting all that together and then going out to market and getting the right partner on board, and then making sure that once they're on board, everything they ask for and everything we promised happens. So it's a lot of execution, it's a lot of project managing, it's a lot of communication between teams internally and externally, connecting people that need to talk to each other, because I don't speak engineer or I don't necessarily speak design, but I speak enough peripherally so that I can just connect the glue and make sure that everyone's on the same page. So that's my day-to-day.
But I love that the way you explain this, first of all, because I had down on my notes, like, what is strategic partnerships? And what I find fascinating about this department in sports is I don't think a lot of people know what it is or that it exists. And that's something that Celeste and I are trying to kind of shed light on and open up, that there are more jobs in sports than people realize. There's so much behind the scenes. And you're also like a wish granter. What do
Yeah,
you want?
really. No,
You get this, and you get this. You're like the Oprah of The Athletic, and you
try
get
to
this
be.
on the app.
That's the goal, is to like, we want to bring in anything that makes the app better and makes people's job easier, or we definitely don't want to be a hindrance, right? And we don't want to be a burden to anyone. And that sometimes can happen in partnerships where it's like, hey, we just brought in $10 million. You have to do this now.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Certain teams get like, oh God, we have 30 social posts to send out because X, Y, and Z partner came in. Why we're the strategic partnerships team is because people aren't just paying for a social post within our world. They're paying for an integration. And we want to make sure that integration is as endemic as possible, where it just makes sense that the social post went out and that StubHub presented it.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about Messi coming to Inter Miami and the ticket sales going crazy. That makes sense for us to post about that, and that StubHub could be integrated with that, right? So we don't want to just be just a slap a brand on something and that's what it is. We want to be very smart and strategic about it. And to your point, oh God, to your point about jobs in sports, so when we're going to get into this, but when I left college, and I'm not saying this to brag, but I'm just saying this to like give you a concept of how smart you can be and how little you can still know. I graduated Yale University thinking that the only real sports jobs were to play the sport, to coach the sport, to be a doctor for those who play the sport, to own the teams of the people that play the sport, or to be the person that talks about the sport, aka a reporter. I had no idea you could be an accountant for the team of the people that play the sport, right? No idea that you could be a person that does HR, right? For the team that plays the sport, right? So I had no idea of that. There are entire organizations, corporations behind these businesses, and it's not just team side. There's agencies that work with players. There's agencies that work with properties, right? There's agencies that work just with a Madison Square Garden or just with the Chase Center. Like, I had no idea of all the possibilities in sports. And I think that that's the number one thing. When people, how did you get your job? I'm always like, it's multiple lanes and there's multiple jobs. Like, don't just think about this one.
Right.
It just so happened that that's the path I went. But yeah, we'll get into that too.
I love that because it's about broadening your view, and hopefully this podcast will do that for people. And that means there's endless guest opportunities, Celeste, for us. So we could just keep going. Okay. So I want to get in. We want all the background on that and your job with The Athletic and Yale. We're going to get into all that, but you also are a sideline reporter for the Santa Cruz Warriors and you're hosting for the Warriors. So tell us a little bit about what those duties involve along with your job at The Athletic. So here you're juggling. That's got to be tough.
So one of the best things about working at The Athletic is we are a global company and we're remote. So my boss is in Chicago. My direct report is in New York. The teams I work with are all around not only the country, but the world, literally. Engineering teams in Australia. My ad team is in London. Like, it's all over the place. So what's nice about that, especially coming from the job I had before working for a team, was I got all this time on my hands. And I was like, I'm like at home. I don't have to sit in traffic. I don't whatever. Like I felt idle. I want to do something. And I always had the dream growing up that I wanted to talk for a living. I like to talk, can you tell? I do like
You're good at it.
You are good at it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I really like to tell stories. I like to inform. I like to cultivate communication and conversation. I like to hear other people tell their stories. I like to ask questions, things of that sort too. So I'm actually fighting the urge to ask you guys more about yourselves right now. But all of it it's always been something I like to do. Literally, I tell the story every time, but like I was in second grade with Miss Windley. And she had all of us in our second grade class fill out these green butterflies. And on one side, we had to fill out what school we wanted to go to. And the other side, we had to fill out what job we wanted. And on one half of my butterfly, I wrote that I wanted to go to Yale University. Got that. Yay. And then the other side, I wrote that I wanted to be an ESPN reporter. And both of them, like both reasons why I chose those two was because it seemed important. the president at the time when I was in second grade had gone to Yale. So I was like, oh, that's where you want to go because that's where the president went. Like, boom. Wasn't much thought into that, but that's what it was. And then the other side of it was, from an ESPN perspective, was I just remembered my aunt used to have these like really large house parties and like family gatherings, and how everyone would gather around the television when ESPN was on, and how important whoever it was that was talking on the screen like was for the party. Like, whole party going on, people are watching ESPN and sports talk television and all that. And so I always thought, oh, that seems important too. I want to do that. And so any opportunity there was, like morning announcements, like anything like that, I did. And so I turned 30, and it was like my 30th birthday, and I was like listening to this podcast called The Mindset Motivation, I think it's called. But one point in the podcast, he goes, when you are 80 years old and your kids come up to you and say, like, Grandma, Grandpa, did you try to achieve everything that you ever wanted to, or like go after every dream that you had, something like that? Could you answer them honestly and say yes? And I remember I was walking my dog and I stopped and I was like, oh, I can't say yes to that. Like, I cannot. I have not fully actually gone after dream. And I immediately went home and I LinkedIn DM. This is a big thing for those of you listening. Use your DMs, use your LinkedIn network.
Yes.
And I reached out to Kareth Burke, who was the sideline analyst for the Golden State Warriors. And I literally reached out to her and said, I've always been fascinated by what you do and very interested in what it is that you do. I'd love to talk to you if you have a few minutes of your time. And she was so sweet. It was like during the summer, she was super busy. I think she was like on vacation or something like that. And she's like, well, I can't talk to you right now, but we could definitely talk. We had done one panel before when I was working at the Warriors. And she's like, I remember you from the panel. Like, we could definitely talk. But before we connect, the Santa Cruz Warriors sideline reporter job is open. You should go apply. Would have never known.
Right.
It was open. Worked for the Warriors. I still would have never known that it was open and that you could apply. And I was like, oh gosh, okay. And I'm like pulling up all of my content from like college, because the thing I had was like play-by-play stuff that I'd done for our volleyball team and other random things. And I put it all together and I sent that off. And of course, it was Santa Cruz, so they knew me and whatever. I ended up getting the job. My day-to-day with that, I had to go to the Athletic and ask them for permission because it was conflict. And they basically said, you can do anything that we don't offer, which I appreciate them so much for, but they don't offer television, right? But they can do writing and they can do podcasts. So I couldn't do any podcasts for anyone else, and I couldn't do any writing for anyone else, but I could do television. So my day-to-day included, I live in Oakland, California. Santa Cruz is about an hour and a half away. That is if that's good traffic.
Good traffic.
Driving to Santa Cruz, pre-games, sitting down with the coaches from each team, talking with them, asking them questions, prepping stories or anything like that, hits that I can have during the game. If I can, grabbing a player, asking them about how practice has been, how season's been going, just catching up with them. So again, I can have something to offer, learning more about them, really building relationships with the team personnel, not only just the head coaches and the star players, but everyone else, right? That's really big. Like, you know the CEO just as much as you know the receptionist. Like, that's a very because everyone can help you. And
the ushers are
key. Exactly.
Get to know the ushers.
Know everything. And so getting all of that together and then prepping my hits. And basically what that means is throughout the game, I would have 4 times that I was on television and then maybe additional more based on like breaking news or whatever. But I need to come back from a commercial break and to tell the audience something important. And sideline reporting is actually so much harder than anything.
Yay, finally. Justification.
No, it's so hard. You have 90 seconds on average to say something legitimate, relevant, and timely. And
90 seconds, babe, is a lifetime. I'm gonna have to do baseball with the pitch clock now.
30 seconds to 90 seconds, but it's like, it's very short when you're looking at the time that you have.
It is.
You stumble, you have 90 seconds, and that's max, right? Like if you're talking longer than 90 seconds, that's a lot. Like
you're gonna get in trouble.
Exactly, you're gonna get in trouble. So you have a certain fixed amount of time to say something important and not stumble. Pressure, okay? Pressure. And so a lot of my job was just like trying to get through my hits while looking at the television. And then in Santa Cruz, I didn't have something called an IFB. I still don't know what an IFB stands for, but it's a thing that goes into your ear that allows you to hear your producer and hear the show. And they can tell you when you should go, when you should talk, when you shouldn't talk. They can prep you when you're like 15 seconds out from commercial break, whatever it is. I don't have one of those in Santa Cruz because it's the G League. It's a little bit,
why not?
Rudimentary in comparison to the Golden State level or the NBA level. And so I'm just like waiting for a cameraman to count me down and then waiting for a cameraman to count me out and talking into a mic. Can't hear what I'm saying, can't hear what the show is saying, but I better get this part down and get it right.
That's almost like that's the equivalent of not being able to see something. I mean, to not have an IFB. Celeste, can you get on this? Can you help her with this? This is like Celeste.
Yes, I can help you. We'll make this happen.
Interruptible fold back. I've never known what IFB meant either.
I didn't either.
In 25 years of broadcasting and wearing one, it's interruptible fold back.
We're all learning. We're all learning on this podcast.
I almost put Celeste on this. I'm like, Celeste probably knows. And then I'm like, oh, I don't know.
All right, let's start about your story too.
I know, I'm just
the beginning.
No, well, and I mean, it's so everything you talked about was so amazing because I love your mind and how you think and work, and that you're a human translator, in my opinion, talking to different groups and coordinating and connecting them. But let's talk about, you were born in France, grew up in North Carolina. What's your family background and how has that helped you with your success?
For sure. So yes, my parents are both Guinean. And Guinea is an African country in the western part of the country that was colonized by the French. And so French is a national language there, and there's often a lot of immigration between the two countries. And so my parents immigrated to France a lot when they were a lot younger, and they met, had my sister and myself there. And then my dad had, I would say, the bright idea to say, the kids should grow up in America. And this was like in the early 90s. Or mid 90s. And this was like right on the cusp of economic, like what's going on in Europe starting. And he started early. And so he was like, the kids should go to the States, get an education, get a like college degree. It's a lot simpler of a system here in America than it is in France. So that was kind of like the reason we ended up in the United States. And ended up being my mom, my sister, and myself. And we grew up in North Carolina. We had an aunt here that kind of took us in as we got like ready and acclimated to American life and American culture. And I grew up in a small town. I actually looked this up yesterday. My town of Knightdale, North Carolina, when I was there, had like 8,000 people. It now has 4,000 people, which is kind of crazy that it like grew so fast, but it was a small town, relatively. Like I know small towns are like under 1,000, but it felt very small. And then if you played sports, very small. But yeah,
Celeste is feeling you. She's absolutely feeling you. Our girl's from Idaho.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
4,000, one stoplight.
Okay, so we weren't that bad, but we were close. Like, a funny story I always say is like the first time I was ever pulled over for a cop for like I rolled through a stop sign. It ended up being the cop that was at my basketball game the night before. And he like pulls up to the window and I'm like sobbing, crying. And he's like, Zena? And I'm like, oh God. And then my mom pulls up and they're like talking forever. So that's how small my town is.
She had a really good game last night. I'm gonna let this pass.
Literally. Like, yeah. So grew up there. And I think that the way I grew up influences everything about the way I approach life, approach people, think about things, why I think I'm good at partnerships and thinking outside of the box or thinking from a different lens, and also dealing with different clients. So let's put it all together. I was born to African parents, which has its own different type, like a special type of culture and upbringing and values and morals and ideals. that then immigrated to France. France has its own level of culture and ideals and morals and values and all the above in the way that they interact with the world. And then I grew up in the American South, which has its own, set, right?
Yeah,
so I
totally.
different, distinct, and strong cultures all influencing the way that I grow up and the way and what I find important or what I value or what I, the way that I look at education, the way that I look at being a woman in the world, the way that, all of these things are impacted by where my parents are from, where I was born, and then where I was raised. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't figure out the language for it. And that's why I ended up studying anthropology at Yale, because anthropology finally gave me, I would say, a system in which I could operate and like understand, oh, okay, the concept of culture. This is why, I am so open with certain people because of my American South kind of like upbringing and everyone and sweetie and baby and all that.
Bless your heart.
Exactly. Bless your little heart. And then there's a bit more conservative and a little bit closed. And that's, I think, more my French upbringing. Things are, stay in a certain way and a certain, and, you don't reveal everything. And so there's just like, every time I just always like picked up on like different ways that my upbringing influenced me. When I got to Yale and I studied anthropology, I also played basketball. And playing a sport is another way to quickly learn cultures, because you are playing
its own language. That's for sure.
Yeah, you're playing sports with people that come from all different types of backgrounds, and you've got to find a way to be successful in that, right? And be a good teammate and be productive in that space. And so I think that how I was raised and where I'm from also influenced that my ability to be a good teammate and be able to play on a team sport at a high level, even though I wasn't very good. Like I started playing basketball in high school essentially, and I was athletic. I was super athletic. But was I a very good basketball player? No. I was very much a raw product is what a lot of coaches that recruited me called me. But
I bet you were coachable though, which
I was coachable and I was vocal.
Well,
right? I was a person that could run the floor and I could talk, right? I was annoying on defense and all the above. So those are the things that got me recruited for sure. And yeah, it's a little bit about how my background kind of fed into why I went to Yale, what I studied, et cetera. And now in my day-to-day, it has come out in so many interesting ways. I led a tour for Moet Hennessy when I was working for the Golden State Warriors in French, because I can speak French.
That's cool. I was thinking, can she speak French? I was wondering.
Yeah, so like that was an interesting thing to do. But then also just like seeing how my mom has a very thick accent and she's very self-conscious about it. And seeing her grow up and be self-conscious about, even though knowing she was incredibly bright and incredibly smart, how she operated in the world was always very like meek and wanting to be quieter and wanting to be accepted and assimilated, right, into American culture and American society. It almost like, I feel like I make up for her, right, in the way that I am super vocal and super present and very and very assimilated, sure, but also unique and independent in my own way. And so all of these things impact, just how I interact with the world and how I interact with my jobs. And I think that helps me in the success that I've been able to find so far.
Celeste, I want to ask you on this too, what Zena just said. There's so much going on right now in the noggin about you, because you're just like this anomaly of fascination to me of all these different cultures. Most people don't even get exposed to another country in their life and look at where you're from and all that you have to feed upon and to learn from, and you've embraced it all. You're just, wow, you're super inspiring. But the mom comment, especially the mom being meek, I feel that way too about my mom to a certain age. I think of my mom like prior to 50 and after 50. Something happened at 50 for my mama. She's like, you know what? I have a voice and I'm going to use it. So I don't know if that is necessarily cultural or gender based or a generational thing, even though I know our moms aren't the same age. I think my mom's, I'm probably closer to your mom's age than she is to my mom. But I wonder about that. Is there something that's happening in our society for our gender as women, that we're seeing something, in our parents and our mothers that we want to, for lack of a better term, make up for, or take a different route, or see what we can do? Although my mom was very vocal in the house, not socially until after 50. So that's what was your mom like?
My mom was very strong in the house too, much like your mom, Amy, where she would speak her mind and she's all about the truth, right? And being totally authentic, to the point where sometimes it's like, okay, let's go, let's do this, let's do that. But really didn't use the voice as much outside of the home either. And I think it caused, me and more of our generation, especially Amy, and I love hearing what you said, Zena, about this, to really kind of, help with that void that our mothers didn't have, and say, okay, they gave us such amazing lives, right? They were great mothers. They helped provide for us. They put us first, and we got to go do something with that and make that impact. Like, I feel that responsibility all the time. I got to go out in the world and make an impact, because my mother has been extraordinary as a support for me.
Yeah. And I know my mom's like such a proponent of Title IX, and like she's so vocal now, but she didn't grow up playing sports. And she had a baby at 17. And so I always kind of put that together, that she didn't even have time to find who she was until later, because she was raising us. But I always felt like I made up for that. Like, I had this side of me that was competitive, and Zena and I have this friend in common, Amber, and she would totally attest to what a monster I was on the volleyball court. Like, nobody liked me, but I didn't care, because I was like, I had this drive to win. My mom didn't give me that. I think maybe my dad did, but there was something inspired by my mom. So I love that you mentioned your mom, because I think they play such a role in who we are, and the trail that you're blazing, Zena, today, for young women watching you and use your voice. It's huge. I love it.
100%. And I appreciate you guys sharing about your moms too. And I think you make a great point. It is a generational thing. It is a gender societal based thing. I think for my mom, it was probably compounded being being a Black woman in the South, raising two girls as a single mom. My parents eventually ended up divorcing. But I definitely think that there's something to be said about the children, particularly the women, the girls of these women being like, I saw what you went through, and I saw what you did for me, and I want to be a representation of you, and the representation of you. And I think that, for me, 1000%, that's all I want to do for not only my mother, but my sister. Because my older sister, I have a sister that's 3 years older than me. She also ended up being a de facto parent for me as well, being older than me. But my sister was the first person in our family at 8 years old to learn English. Right?
Oh, wow.
So 8 years old on the bus while everyone's, playing around, doing all this other stuff that you do on the school buses. She's memorizing street signs. So she for my mom. Right. And so I look at the two of them and the sacrifices that they made the same way that you guys probably look at your mom and your moms, and you think about the sacrifices they made for their identities and, their personal journeys and all the above. I want to represent them well. Everything I do is really tied to making sure that they're proud of me and that I represent them well and they have something to brag about. So.
Yeah. How proud were your parents when you got that letter from Yale?
Oh, my mom was, I think all of Africa, the entire continent got the call. I am pretty sure that is what happened. My mom always she used to be so casual about it. She'd be like, yeah, that's what we do, etc. Yeah. And now that I'm older, she's like, oh, I still can't believe it, man. It's so crazy, this and that. I was like, you really made it seem like this was the baseline, okay? When I was in, I was
Yale or bust.
Right. Literally. So no, now she's I think she's way more vocal and appreciative and proud and but back then she was just yeah, it's no big deal. no, great job. I'm happy for you. I'm so excited. But no, my mom, they always say this about your parents. Parents are so backwards because they will talk so much crap to you to your face and then to speak your like praises to everyone else. It's like, thanks. I don't know. All my aunts are like, yeah, we know exactly what dorm you're in. Like, I'm like, really? Interesting. I had no
My
idea.
mom said that.
Yeah, exactly. No, my mom was very, very proud, but she like was very chill about it to me. So
We do that as parents, though, Zena, too, like the opposite. So I think, at times my children are terrible people. But then I hear from somebody
And they're
outside
not.
how great they are. And I'm like, you know what? We're doing okay, Paul. We're doing okay. We got an outside comment that our son and daughter are nice people. So now
And they are.
I'm gonna believe it. I'm sorry, kids. That was really mean to say, but it's true. There are times.
The way my mom would be like, yeah, your room's never clean and
You're flawed. In your mom's eyes, you're flawed.
Thanks.
In our eyes, you're perfect, though.
Yes,
No,
totally perfect.
So I know Celeste is going to ask you about basketball, but I want to ask you about your college experience because we hope so many college students, male and female, are listening to this podcast for resource and intellect and education on how to get jobs in the sports industry. How did you use your college experience? Fascinated that you studied anthropology first and foremost, because I think a lot of people think they have to study some type of sports kinesiology, something where that's sports related and or communications like I did, and you didn't, and you broadened yourself even more. But how did you use your college experience to network, whether it was internships or did you use your time at Yale? And then I know you got a master's at Wake Forest as well, to land kind of your first gig.
Yeah. I don't know how many people are going to be on this podcast that are going to be in a situation like I was, because I did not do any internships in college.
Oh, lucky you.
And there probably are going to be people that are listening to this podcast. I imagine there will be a great, this is an assumption, but there will be a great percentage of people that are listening to this podcast because they don't have the network right now to tell them. And I was one of those people. As the daughter of a single mom and an immigrant, my mom was a gas station manager my entire life. We didn't have people that like had worked at corporations.
Sure. Didn't know those people yet. Yeah.
I didn't have those people. I also didn't know how to network in college. I had no idea what that looked like or what that felt like. We didn't talk about these things at the dinner table. And so I took jobs because I had to. I couldn't afford to go do the internships in New York and all these other things. So I really was a sports camp counselor almost every summer during college. I did do one program, which was another sports camp counselor, but it was a unique one called X-Mester, where I got exposure to all of these college athletes from around the country through a program started by a former Yale athlete named Patricia Melton, who's one of my mentors. That was probably the closest I got to an internship experience because I learned how to put on a leadership class for these kids that were at the camp, and got exposure. And I was the youngest one there. Everyone else was graduating seniors and I was a sophomore. And so I got all exposure to kids like swimmers from Princeton and football players from USC. And it was just a great melting pot. Either way, I had no work experience outside of that. And that is what actually led me to Wake Forest. If you are listening to this podcast and you have no idea what to do next, don't worry. You can take a job, and that doesn't have to be your end all be all. You can also go to school again, and that doesn't have to be your end all be all. You have to fit what works for your schedule and what works for your budget. Only reason at first that I went to Wake was because I got a scholarship. So my senior year, I was one of 4 in my basketball class, and almost everyone had a job pretty much coming out of about to graduate. I had no idea what I wanted to do. Because I had no internship experience, I didn't have a set job set up like 2 of my teammates had. And I also just didn't know what my skills were. I didn't know what I was good at. I didn't know what I could bring to a company. And I didn't want to just get any old job. So my coach, actually, crazy story, my coach's babysitter from years ago started working at Wake Forest University in a program they had just started called the Masters of Management program. It was a new program that was popping up around the country. Wake Forest had one, UVA had one, I think Michigan may have had one, but very few schools had this. And it was basically a starter degree before your MBA. You go get your Masters of Management, and then you could go get a job in between, like for 5 months, whatever. And then you could go back and finish your MBA. But you would get a degree of management, and then you could go back and get your MBA. It was focused for liberal arts students. So liberal arts kids.
Heads up.
Listen up. And they essentially gave you business skills. And this woman was telling my coach about this, and my coach knew I was the one kid that was like in her senior class. I had no idea what the heck she wanted to do. And she was like, yeah, you should look into this. And she told her former babysitter about me, and they had their recruiter reach out to me and ask me and tell me about the program. And it was all about people that studied degrees like anthropology that weren't going to go work for National Geographic, which is what I intended to do. Figure out a way to get there.
Our last guest worked for National Geographic, got seen and got a job at ESPN. Yeah. Serena.
Okay.
You never know.
Person ASAP, because I feel like it's going to come full circle for me.
It does.
But yeah, so I connected with him, and he was like, I mean, your grades are great. I think you'd be a great option for this program. And we have a fellowship program where you could get sponsored by a brand to come. And I got sponsored by Cigna Healthcare to go get my Master's of Management.
I have Cigna.
Yeah, there it is. Yes.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
It was a great decision for me.
That's great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So many kids don't know what they want to do when they grow. I didn't know what I wanted
to
do.
I knew nothing about business. I knew nothing about what I brought to the table. And in this 1 year, it was really 10 months, I was able to figure all of that out. I was able to figure out not only my own skills and what I bring to the table, but I was also able to figure out how to work LinkedIn. I was able to figure out I was able to get my resume in place. All these things, having gone to Yale University, still didn't get in place, right? So if you're going to a school that's not Yale University and you're worried that your resume isn't in place, your LinkedIn's not ready, or that you don't know how to, trust me, you're just fine. You're just fine.
Nice.
And that was my path. And I don't necessarily think everyone needs to go to business school. I actually don't. I do sit on the board at Wake Business, so I'm always going to support them and support people to go, but it's not for everyone. And you do have to think about your finances and all the above, but really think about, what do you need? And I look at business school as an opportunity. If you don't know hard skills for business, yeah, probably smart that you go. Like if you were an art major, or if you were an English major, or if you were a major that you're not able to translate those classes and what you learned directly into a job, and you need a little bit more help, business school is an option. If you need a new network, like if you went to an undergrad that like you're not able to tap in and find the people you need in your network, and you're trying to shift industries, or you're trying to meet new people, business school is a great option for that. But ultimately, a lot of what you learn in work, you learn on the job.
Totally. 100%.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I think the one thing too that you were talking about that really resonated with me is when I hire for ballet sports, and let's say someone just wants for me to mentor them or talk to them, I try to hammer home it is about the skill sets. It is about what have you learned. So even as an athlete, those skill sets can transfer over if you know how to sell yourself. And I just think you've done a great job of selling yourself. And I you've talked about this. How do you feel people should approach selling themselves and really getting out there to get their dreams and get what they want?
Yeah, I think it stems to what I was just talking about you got to know your skills. Like you really have to sit down with yourself and be like, what am I good at? And don't think just in the school context, or don't think just in the work context. Think about like, people do these quizzes on like BuzzFeed, like, or whatever. Who are you as a friend? Are you the friend that when people don't know something, they ask you to dumb it down? That's a skill, right?
Break this down.
Are you the friend when you were growing up that if your friends wanted to stay over, they looked at you to go ask the parents. It's a skill, right? And I'm listing things that
I'm thinking of that friend I have. It was not Amber, Zena.
oh, was it?
No. No, Amber was the one. Oh, I don't know what's going to happen there.
Right? Like, or when that happens and you and your friends are about to make a bad decision, are you the one that lists out the pros and cons?
Mm-hmm.
Right? These are all things that you can pick up about yourself, your personality trait,
Totally.
like what your habits are. Are you able to stick to a to-do list? Are you able to like write out a plan? Do you coordinate your friend trips? Like these type of things are skills that I need in business school to help me understand that I have. You don't necessarily need that, but you just need to be able to like sit down and like realize what
Evaluate yourself fairly. Yeah.
all of that can translate to words on a resume.
So true.
Literally. And there's so many resources out there that people don't utilize enough. Like literally Google 100 words for my resume, action verbs for my resume,
Mm-hmm.
and go through and see, does this apply to me? Right? Like, are these skills that apply to me based on what I know about myself and what I know to be true about what I've brought to friendships, relationships, work environments, school environments, teams, all the above. I think that that's the number one thing in being able to sell yourself is because you can't sell things you don't know. And if you don't know yourself and you don't know yourself like a product,
right,
you can't tell your best features. You can't tell, your shelf life.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, to your point though, I think a lot of people come and say, hey, what job would I be good at? Where could you see me going? Where can you see me ending up? And I think that's our own responsibility as we're going down our path, that we need to be the ones that are selling where we want to go and really have that purpose and passion to drive us to get there. And I think so many people get caught up in the label of the job. I want to be a VP by the time I'm 30. I want to be a VP, by the time I'm 35, a talent, all of those things. And I think when you're a curious person and you want to make an impact on the world, you're always looking at those skill sets to improve. You're always saying, okay, like Amy and I, let's do a podcast. We haven't done a podcast before. Yeah. We're learning as we go. We're making mistakes. We're doing all sorts of things, but we're curious and we want to make that impact. So that's that drive to kind of push us through.
I will say, I would just add for anybody listening that's really young, that I think identifying your skill sets and your strengths, evaluating yourself gets better with age. It's one thing that gets better as you get older, is you can really start to be very honest about what you are good at, what you want to do, and what you don't want to do. It's the one piece of advice I always offer to my students or to kids I'm mentoring is don't be afraid of realizing you don't want to do this. You took this job, you hate this job. I mean, I've had a lot of jobs that I hated, the overnight shifts in news, and I did that while I was pregnant. And I'm like, just a second, I'm going to go throw up and I'll finish the write-up right after this. I hated that. So I knew, okay, I like television, but I don't want to do the morning show. I don't want to do those hours. Like it gets you closer to your yeses. But as Zena's saying, Celeste, the ability to sell, it never stops. Yeah. It never ends that you're going to have to sell yourself in anything. And it's a huge skill. And I love that you put that out there, and you put that out there at a very young age for people to realize. It's huge. I do want to ask you, because I know we're running out of time. I feel like we could talk to Zena forever. Celeste, amazing.
Yes.
I would like to know, because we focus on interviewing women on this show, even though the show is for everyone. We wanted to empower women in sports because we are a minority in sports. But I'd like to know the challenges and the accomplishments you feel you have dealt with as a female in the sports industry, because I think it's important for people to see the whole thing and to be very transparent about our experiences.
I appreciate that, because I wish people would have been a little bit more transparent and open with me. The number one thing as a woman, especially as a young woman coming into this space, is trying to please everyone. Because sports is a space where they say, if you don't want to do it, I'll find somebody who will.
Oh yeah.
And that's for everyone, right? Men or women.
Yep.
So you automatically have that of, you got to grind, you got to hustle, you got to do everything they tell you to do. You got to overexert yourself, which I'm not going to take away. You do. You're going to have to do some ugly jobs, and you're going to have to do some ugly work, and you're probably not going to get paid really well at the beginning, but
forever. But it's fine.
Yeah, right. It's a real thing too. We're not going to get that.
Just being transparent.
Gotta be transparent. My very first pay stub coming out of school, with a Yale degree and a Wake Forest business degree, my annual pay stub working for the Miami Dolphins was $24,000. So yeah.
Sounds about right.
Not there anymore, but just saying. I think that trying to please everyone, and the problem with trying to please everyone in sports, especially in a male-dominated space, is there's also the lean into what does pleasing look like from a woman's perspective. That means being accommodating, being, quote, nice, being sweet, being gentle, being I worked in Miami when I first started. I worked for a football team, which is a whole nother space. And there's a level of sexual innuendo around that, right? Of like how you dress, how you do your hair, how wearing makeup, all these things of trying to please the fan, please your bosses, please your coworkers, etc. Being the cool girl in the office. Whew.
And still being you.
And still trying to be.
Don't lose yourself in all that, right?
So that is a big challenge to fight against. And I'll say that I didn't do it perfectly. I definitely leaned into being a pretty girl. I leaned into the fact that I knew people around me thought I was cool because I was small and played basketball and I was pretty, whatever. I remember there was.
You are pretty cool, though. I mean, I think that's a stretch.
But I was offered a job literally to just be a salesperson to celebrities. And I almost said yes, because I was like, this is what the company wants. But they just wanted to take advantage of the fact that I was pretty and they weren't going to pay me well. And I said no. And quickly I saw how much they valued me because they were pissed.
Yeah.
Said no. So I definitely say that that's probably the biggest challenge, is staying true to yourself while trying to be what other people view women to be in this space. People also think women are supposed to be the ones that are always in the service roles, always giving to people as opposed to asking.
Caretaking.
Right? We're supposed to be the caretakers. We're supposed to be the hospitality people. We're supposed to be are coordinating everything, that put on the events and all the other things. You can also be in sales. You can also be the one that signs the checks and asks for the money and demands the money. Right? And all of these, you could be competitive in that way too. And so I would say that's the biggest challenge I experienced. People are going to be sexist. People are going to speak over you. People are going to take your ideas. People are going to say exactly what you just said in a different way, but seemingly say it loud.
Mansplain you.
Mansplain it. People are going to ask where your boss is when you are the boss. People are going to do a lot of that, but that's not just sports. That's across the board. It probably could be, I don't know, maybe it's worse in sports. I've only ever been in sports, so I don't know. But you've got to stay true to yourself. If you feel uncomfortable, say something. And find allies. Both women and men, people you truly trust to be able to, because sometimes you can't always do something about it, but you got to vent, right? You got to be able to have something to get it out, or else you're going to resent going to work every day. Or you're going to resent people you're around, and that's going to impact your work. And at the end of the day, no matter what challenge you experience, people being rude, people being sexist, people being whatever, you never want it to impact your work, because now they have an impact on how far you can go in this industry. And
they take your power.
They take your power, and they take your reputation sometimes. I've seen that happen. So definitely trying to stay true to yourself while trying to please everyone. It's not an easy balance. I would say focus on trying to stay true to yourself and doing your best work.
This has been a great interview, Zena. Let's wrap it up with any other advice you want to give our listeners and viewers to really go for their dreams and get out there and grab them.
I would say don't be afraid to ask questions. Celeste, I love that you were talking about being curious, because it really comes down to that. People appreciate people being asked questions about what they do. People appreciate the opportunity to help others. Like, people love to talk about themselves. It's like number one. So be curious, ask questions, and then remember, right? That's how you leave an impression on. Remember what they were talking about, circle back, connect the dots, and just don't be afraid to ask questions. And if that's on LinkedIn, if that's in person, it always ends up opening a conversation that you never knew you needed, or that could help you in the long run. Yeah. Stay curious.
Oh man, we're gonna be like,
this was
we
great.
knew her win.
Yes.
We knew little Zena, little young Zena win.
Thank you so much.
So much, Zena. You're amazing. I'm
You
so
are.
excited for fans to listen to this podcast. I learned so much.
Me too.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you, Miss Zena. Hopefully we'll talk soon. We'll go out for a drink with Amber.
For sure. Exactly.
Okay, we'll make Amber pay, because we just told everybody we don't make very much money.
She connected us.
She did.
Right?
She connects everybody. She's our hub. Yeah. All right. And I'm a subscriber to The Athletic. Everybody subscribe, please. Yes.
Me too. Me too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Zena.
All right. Celeste, you're like, when she's talking about the allies, you're my ally.
You're mine.
You were
too.
my first ally.
Mine too. I love this podcast. I just loved this conversation. Amy, who do we have coming up in August?
No, I'm really excited. I realize, like, I have a lot of work friends. I have a lot of friends. That's the other thing. When you get older, you get a lot of friends. So, bye, Miss Zena. Okay, so coming up in August, everyone, we want you to tune in, because it is my friend and colleague, Miss Maria Guardado, who covers the San Francisco Giants for MLB.com. She's a beat writer, so talk about grinding it out. Man, does she do that. She also, Celeste, covered the Mets and the Angels, so there's going to be a lot of baseball discussion in that one for sure. And she grew up in the Bay Area, and she also attended Yale. And I guess we're only going to have people who went to Yale on this podcast. What are we doing here, Celeste?
Only smart cookies, right?
What are we doing here?
All right. That's our guest for August. And we've had on a lot of our friends, as Amy said, and we want you, our viewers and followers that are our friends as well, to weigh in who inspires you and who we should talk to on this podcast. So hit us up on our social @GirlGig and let us know.
Yeah, we're on all the platforms. We really want to know who you want to hear from. And chances are we know them. I mean, we've been around a while. All right. That's another one in the can. For Celeste Gearing, I'm Amy G. Thanks so much for tuning in to Girl, How'd You Get That Gig?